In the Old West, hygiene barely existed. Anyone crossing the continent faced long trails, harsh weather, and little water, so the priority was staying alive, not taking a bath. Between dust, animals, and all kinds of mishaps, washing your body or clothes had to wait. That's the rough everyday life we're going to explore. How men and women made do with cold basins, rags, and the occasional river to keep going and avoid getting sick, even without comfort, luxury, or extra time. Because in that world, cleaning up wasn't about vanity. It was about surviving day after day without losing your way, ever. In the Old West, the dust never seemed to end. Winds and storms blew dirt into houses, stores, and even barns, putting at risk anyone trying to live there. A young woman named Sarah Raymond Herndon, who left Missouri for the Montana Territory in the late 1860s, said that in some stretches, the trail dust almost reached their knees. After walking about 20 miles and setting up camp, she noticed the boys. Their faces were so darkened that you could only see their eyes, nose, and mouth. It was the daily price of heading west. Back in the Old West, far from towns and any kind of sewage system, most people just squatted behind a bush and that was that. Even so, outhouses were a regular part of frontier life. They were built close to the house to avoid long walks at night and were pretty basic. A hole in the ground, a small wooden shack on top, and zero luxury. When the hole filled up, people covered it with dirt and built the same setup somewhere else in the yard. As you can imagine, the smell wasn't exactly pleasant. To mask it, they'd throw lime or lye down the hole. The stuffy space also attracted flies and spiders, even black widows, which sometimes bit people who sat there too distracted. Toilet paper wasn't part of their world. They used whatever was handy, leaves, grass, or even corn cobs, a practical solution, but definitely not a comfortable one. Thinking about that helps remind us how rough and improvised life was back then, and how the simple act of going to the bathroom today is a privilege earned with time, technology, and far fewer unpleasant surprises. In the American West, many beds were still stuffed with hay and straw. Since the filling was almost never changed, lice and other pests, nicknamed seam squirrels, soon appeared, turning rest into something far from hygienic. To make things worse, flies hovered around food and waste, spreading filth. The houses, poorly sealed, also let in clouds of mosquitoes. Since window screens were rarely used, insects moved freely from the kitchen to the outhouse and back, carrying everything they touched. That meant daily life came with bites, itching, and the risk of infection, a hard cycle to break without better materials or more isolation. It was the price of living far from urban comfort. In the Old West, getting clean drinking water was a matter of survival, but it was almost never simple. Settlers often built their outhouses too close to their homes and, without realizing it, let sewage seep into the ground and reach the water sources used by neighbors downhill. To make things worse, many people depended on rainwater, storing it in cisterns where dust, leaves, and small animals often fell in. Standing water also attracted insects that landed, fed, and left waste behind. Because of all that, saving water was the rule. Clothes or dishes were only washed when really necessary, and sometimes people reused their bath water for it. And taking a bath wasn't a daily luxury. The whole family might use the same tub for days, each person going in after the other until the water turned dark and lukewarm, but still considered good enough after a long day. It was practical, cheap, and for those living far from clean rivers, it seemed like the only realistic option. In the Old West, Frank Clifford, a companion of Billy the Kid who was also known as John Menham Whiteman and John Francis Wallace, wrote in his memoirs about a habit that stuck with him. Mexican women washed their hair with the root of the yucca plant, known as soapweed. According to him, it left the hair clean, soft, and shiny, so much so that he started using it himself. Those who didn't have access to the plant used soap made from animal fat instead, a harsher option known for irritating the skin, which made soapweed the far more desirable choice in those dry, tough conditions. Back then, hardly anyone saw a reason to wash up. The smell of people was just part of everyday life, and some even swore that too many baths could make you sick. So few bothered to get in the water. Frank Clifford might have scrubbed his hair with soapweed, but there were some pretty strange alternatives. Some folks used whiskey. It was the height of the tough cowboy image, a guy rubbing Jim Beam on his head and going about his day like it was the most normal thing in the world. It sounded crazy, but it was a quick way to deal with dirt in a place where hot water was a rare luxury. In the Old West, whiskey wasn't just for drinking. It helped disinfect wounds and ease pain. Mixed with lavender and castor oil, it became an improvised shampoo rinsed out with rainwater or soft water treated with borax. Women, after brushing or braiding their hair, styled it with heated pencils. In saloons, though, hygiene was almost non-existent. Bar counters had towels hanging to wipe off beer foam, but they were passed from hand to hand without washing, spreading saliva and disease. What made things worse was the habit of chewing tobacco, which had people spitting on the floor all the time. Spitting became almost automatic, leaving dark stains on the ground and forcing bar owners to throw sawdust around to cover up the dirt and bad smell. It was an accepted habit, but one that turned the place into a perfect breeding ground for germs. In old saloons, it was common to see rows of spittoons lined up along the fronts, giving people a place to spit. Sawdust was thrown over the saliva with the idea that it would help dry things up and keep the place clean, but it barely worked. Worse yet, the sawdust collected filth and became a perfect breeding ground for germs. With so many people coming and going, drinking and even sleeping on those bar floors, that damp mess turned into a hotspot for diseases like tuberculosis and pneumonia, which spread out of control. Things got so bad that some towns made new rules. In stations and on platforms, spitting was banned and could get you a $500 fine, a year in jail, or even both. In the Old West, being a cowboy meant putting up with days and days of dust on your body. Men who lived on horseback, soldiers or travelers, only broke the routine with a quick dip in rivers or streams, usually when the weather was warm enough. In the cold, the rule was simply not to wash. Women took a bit more care. They washed their face and hands early in the morning, trying to keep some dignity. Still, the lack of privacy and the modesty standards of the time made it hard to stay truly clean. Clothes followed the same fate. Many wore the same outfit for weeks, and when they finally decided to clean it, a quick rinse in the nearest stream was enough, just to get rid of the worst of the dirt. It was a routine shaped by scarce water, long distances, and life outdoors, where comfort always came after the need to keep moving. Full hygiene was a rare luxury, almost never a priority. In the Old West, it was common for the same water to be used to wash clothes, unclog makeshift pipes, clean utensils, and also for drinking. This practice made disease outbreaks in camps and settlements almost inevitable. Cholera was one of the most feared. It appeared suddenly, spread fast, and killed settlers and indigenous people alike. In the 19th century, Mormon communities faced especially violent waves of the disease, and many saw its spread as a divine test of faith and perseverance. But the problem wasn't limited to them. Migration and trade routes carried the infection to native villages and new territories, and by 1873 there were records of outbreaks in at least 18 states and regions across the country. Amid the fear, doctors and authorities looked for someone to blame, and minorities often took the fall. In the Dakota Territory, for instance, Russian immigrants were described by one doctor as dirty and of low status, and were blamed for the cholera outbreak in Yankton, even though it was part of a much larger nationwide epidemic used to reinforce existing prejudices. Hygiene in the Old West was far from uniform. Different groups and backgrounds had their own ways of taking care of themselves. While many white men used razors to shave their beards, not everyone followed that practice. Archaeological finds in Deadwood, South Dakota, revealed in 2005 that many Chinese immigrants who lived and worked there avoided shaving. They preferred to pluck their facial hair with tweezers one by one. When a cowboy finally reached a town, though, he usually took the chance to clean up, got a haircut, shaved, and if he could afford it, bought a nice-smelling tonic. Interestingly, Some of the most famous figures of the West went against the clean-cut look. Wild Bill Hickok and General George Armstrong Custer both wore long, well-kept hair. It's said that Custer even perfumed his locks with cinnamon oil. That shows that even in a rough, dusty world, vanity and identity went hand in hand. Taking care of your body was also a way of showing who you were. Every hairstyle or grooming choice said something about a person's background, taste, and place in that world. By the end of the 19th century, hairstyles started to change, and shorter cuts became common again. But while appearances showed signs of modernizing, dental health in the Old West was still pretty much in the Stone Age. Toothbrushes were rare. A lot of people used their own knives to pick food out from between their teeth, and some stagecoach stations even offered communal brushes. One of those ideas no one misses. When a tooth really started to hurt, the answer was almost always to pull it out. There were dentists, like the famous Doc Holliday, but they were few and far between. Most folks went to a barber or even a blacksmith, who yanked the tooth out with tools that looked a lot like pliers. No anesthesia. The only pain relief came from taking swigs of whiskey, one after another, until you had enough courage to go through with it. It was quick, rough, and painful, but good enough for people who lived on the move and couldn't afford to get sick. Thinking about that today really shows how much more comfortable daily life has become, and just how tough they were back then. If their hair followed fashion, their teeth followed the hard reality of the frontier.